Welcome to an audiobook entitled Parish Management and Operations, The Buck Stops Here, narrated by Catholic author Michael Brinda. We hope you enjoy the segment and find it useful in your ministerial work.
Chapter 54, Tactical Discrimination and Delegation. If you are ordained, what is unique to your vocation? Simply this: through your ordination, you have faculties enabling capabilities in the spiritual realm that the laity do not possess, and furthermore, will never possess. That being the case, clearly we want our ordained clergy to spend as much of their time as possible working in the spiritual realm rather than the temporal realm, as issues in the temporal realm can be handled by the lay employees and volunteers working in PMO. But this principled distribution of PMO work does not happen by accident. It becomes imperative that any ordained working in PMO practices the art of tactical discrimination when living the parish organizational chart on a day-to-day basis. What is tactical discrimination? Precisely this: as ordained clergy, you must deliberately, proactively maximize your involvement in all the spiritual realms and minimize your involvement in the temporal realms of the organizational chart. But you must not do so to the detriment of managing both the spiritual and temporal realm issues in a superior manner. Thus, the conundrum we must solve here is about time management, or time discrimination. How do we maximize our time working in the spiritual realm, while at the same time ensuring that everything done in PMO in the temporal realm is concurrently done in a superior manner? Working to achieve this balance between who works in the spiritual realm and who works in the temporal realm on the organizational chart is the essence of tactical discrimination. We are tactically discriminating as ordained where we spend our time between spiritual and temporal duties as these duties are presented to us on the org chart. In other words, which boxes on the org chart will be occupied by an ordained person, and which boxes will be occupied by laity. Ideally, we want every box on the org chart that can be fulfilled by laity to hold the name of a layperson in that box. But why should we care about our ordained being free to practice this tactical discrimination via the PMO org chart? This is why. We want our ordained to spend as much time as possible working in the spiritual realm and doing for souls what only an ordained person can do. A major and driving factor in building robust and superior PMO is to reach a point whereby our ordained can spend most of their time each day on spiritual matters, not temporal matters that can and should be addressed by laity. But when the org chart is populated with incompetent employees and volunteers, PMO efficiency dramatically declines, and this goal becomes impossible to achieve. Instead, every day our ordained are spending an imbalanced and inordinate amount of time on temporal matters that should otherwise be worked on by competent laity. Thus, tactical discrimination is a wonderful concept, but it can only be achieved when the PMO org chart is finally fully populated with superior employees and volunteers. Until such time, everything you just heard immediately above was a waste of your time and electrons on your screen. Sadly, our poor ordained will never be able to practice tactical discrimination. Instead, they will be gang-pressed every day into spending their precious time, an inordinate amount of time, handling issues that have little or nothing to do with the spiritual welfare of souls, and underutilizing the precious faculties derived from their ordination. However, the ordained must also do their part if tactical discrimination is to become a reality. What is the role of the ordained in this regard? As indicated above, superior employees and volunteers must be hired and engaged in every box on the org chart. But there still remains one more critical factor to master: The ordained cannot, must not, waste their precious time by willfully meddling and micromanaging PMO personnel going about their daily duties. What is the point of filling every box on the org chart with superior personnel only for the ordained to be poking his nose into every decision that must be made? You think that is the definition of delegation? Do you think you can retain superior personnel without delegating the authority to them that they need to do their job, and then trusting in them to do the task at hand without any of your meddling? Meddling in the business of a superior employee or volunteer is the quickest way to lose that employee or volunteer. So, why do people meddle and micromanage? The primary reason someone is unwilling or unable to delegate and stop their incessant meddling in the daily work of others comes down to a single principle: fear of risk, fear of failure. Those who cannot or will not delegate are overly fearful of risk. What risk? The risk of the fallout that is necessarily attached to the inevitable mistake someone will make. This fear of someone making a mistake, of course always exaggerated to the most extreme mistake imaginable, is enough to cause the risk-adverse administrator to either constantly meddle in the work of those who report to them, or simply usurp delegated authority under some false pretense so they can go do the task themselves and avoid that pesky risk of failure. Well, let me shed some light on such thinking right now. You cannot fulfill what your ordination promises in the spiritual realm while simultaneously assuming the PMO org chart work for the laity in the temporal realm. This raises the very valid question: why did you become ordained in the first place if you are going to spend the bulk of your time either allowing yourself to be gang-pressed into temporal services or willfully meddling in the temporal matters that require no such ordination? Clearly, you must delegate. But what about the risk? What about the risk that a lay employee or volunteer may blow something up and you have to deal with the fallout and consequences? The answer is very simple. When, not if, blow up happens, you deal with it at that time. Period. End of story. I have known many a manager who, out of an exaggerated fear of risk, will not let go, cannot stop themselves from poking their nose into the realm of others whose job it is to insert whatever task you want in your mind now. Well, here is the plain and simple truth about risk. You can never fully eliminate risk no matter what you do. So you better find a solution besides trying to do all the work yourself. All you can really do is mitigate risk by having superior personnel reporting to you. But there is no free lunch. If you choose to mitigate risk the wrong way, by doing the work of others yourself, you are defeating the purpose of your ordination, wasting your precious ordained faculties, and are on the road to personal burnout. Therefore, you must learn to delegate. Do not meddle and do not micromanage the personnel who report to you. Rather, in lieu of making these mistakes, apply your ordained faculties to bring souls closer to Christ through the application of org chart strategic discrimination. Determine what org chart jobs can and should be performed by the laity. Assign those jobs to trained laity, and then leave the laity alone to do their jobs. Recognize that when something goes haywire, and something always will, you may need to become momentarily involved. You may even need to dismiss the employee or volunteer. But what is not at fault or up for reconsideration is the essential principle, the principle of delegation of authority. Once you stop delegating, you are dooming yourself to spend long and countless hours every day on temporal matters instead of long and countless hours every day on the spiritual matters that we need our ordained to be spending their time on. With the above in mind, from this point we are ready to proceed with creating the PMO organizational chart and writing the master strategic plan. Or maybe not yet. Why? At this point, it only appears we are ready to begin writing our PMO strategic plan. But before we write a plan, what do we need? We need something to act upon, to plan with and into. We need data. We need information to feed into our plan. Information is the raw fuel that feeds the planning process. No data, no plan. To complete the PMO picture and story cannot be the complete PMO picture and story cannot be formed without the facts, or stated another way, we need to paint the picture of the current reality facing the PMO administrator. We need to see all things PMO as they truly are where we are and not as we wish them to be. You cannot build anything without first having the facts of your current situation. You must know the topology of PMO where you are. A building contractor needs architectural plans and blueprints before they begin construction. As such, we already have an enhanced mission statement that enables us to write a statement of culture. The statement of culture animates us and will guide ongoing PMO personnel, interpersonal expectations, and relationships. Thus, we have our mandates in writing to begin our PMO strategic planning. But begin where? You must begin by creating 2 organizational charts, and handwritten is fine. Step 1, create the PMO org chart where you work precisely as it exists today. Just sit down and write it out as best you know it to be. And step 2, eventually, but not yet, we will create the org chart you want to install, but that does not yet exist where you work today. In other words, you must first know what exists as it exists in PMO, which is step 1, before you can convert what exists into how you want things to be in the future, which is step 2. Perhaps there is an existing and up-to-date PMO org chart, but even if something is represented to you as up-to-date, you must still verify what is illustrated in the current org chart as being actual fact. Most likely, expect there will be no up-to-date PMO org chart, if an org chart ever existed at all. Either way, it is best at this stage if you literally start with a blank piece of paper and create your current org chart, box by box, connecting line by connecting line, just as you find it by inquiring from person to person, employee to employee. What is your job title? Who do you report to? Who reports to you? You draw what you hear at this point, no matter what you hear and how incoherent what you are told may look on paper. You draw what you hear. After you create an up-to-date, all-inclusive parish org chart, imagine that an image that accurately reflects all current PMO personnel and volunteers, every single one, including their position title as they currently understand their title to be. You begin your thinking process with your org chart literally in hand, and specifically your org chart as it is now, not yet as you wish it to be. Sit down, because you most likely will need to, and take a hard look at what you have in front of you, and then answer a few questions. Number 1, when asked, could each individual name his or her job title fully and accurately? 2, could each person name, including full job title, who they report to and who reports to them? Number 3, when you draw the lines connecting the boxes on the PMO org chart as it was reported to you to exist to the best of everyone's knowledge, is what you are looking at a coherent, logical, all-encompassing, accurate, functional picture of PMO? Does it look like a PMO org chart should look? Is it all-inclusive of every person and position you know should exist and work in PMO? Does it accurately portray PMO as it should be for PMO to serve the parishioners and geographic community? Is what you are looking at functional and coherent as it is written? Or is it in fact a smoking gun indicator of precisely why your PMO is dysfunctional? For the sake of this discussion, let's say what you have in your hand is an accurate depiction of current PMO. Now what? Your org chart reflects your PMO organizational architecture, all personnel and their managerial relationships. but it is not useful to you unless it is not only accurately constructed, but just as importantly, correctly constructed. Odds are what you have in your hand now, though accurately constructed, in all likelihood is not correctly constructed, and note this critical distinction. Most likely what you have created as your current PMO org chart is actually to some degree an incomplete, incoherent, illogical, and useless org chart as the execution basis and foundation of your strategic plan, much less a highly successful PMO organization. However, it was not a waste of time to create this org chart. Indeed, as stated above, this step is mandatory. You must create your org chart snapshot version 1.0, an image of how your personnel currently perceive PMO to be constructed. Why? Because you must know where you are in order to map accurately how to get to where you want to be. Without org chart version 1.0 as your starting point, you will have no strategic plan starting point at all. You need a starting point in the strategic planning process. It makes no difference if your starting point is a mess, because if you did the above correctly, no matter the starting point mess you have, the org chart map in your hand is still highly useful to you. Why? Because it is an accurate portrayal of your PMO reality. Just because you might not like what you see doesn't make what you see inaccurate. At this point, we want to know where we truly stand right now, not where we would like to stand. Now that you have an org chart, what next? You begin by collecting data for your strategic plan. To do this, simply follow your PMO org chart, literally in hand, where each box leads you. How? Specifically, you question, observe, listen, question, observe, listen, etc. How so? What you observe, who you question, what specific questions you ask are based upon the nature of each box on your org chart. You literally question and observe the person whose name is in the org chart box for each and every box on the org chart. You ask germane questions of each and every person according to the job title of the box each person occupies on the org chart. The org chart in your hand is your roadmap to learning what this person on the org chart, which is to say this box on the org chart, actually does in his or her job. And note this point in the back of your mind now very clearly. Until you know what each person is actually doing in their job, you cannot move forward with whatever retraining or remedial corrections must be done. A quote now from John Henry Newman. In this world no one rules by love. If you are but amiable, you are no hero. To be powerful, you must be strong, and to have dominion, you must have a genius for organizing. End quote. And as you question personnel, how do you listen to the answers you receive? You listen, but you must listen through the filtration of the PMO culture you desire to have in place, as per your statement of culture. As you listen to the answers you receive, you compare and contrast the culture you desire to exist, against the culture that actually exists as derived from the answers you hear. In other words, the culture that exists in PMO upon your arrival. You take notes documenting the information you collect so that you know what specific items must be addressed, and in what order, as per the previously explained, the good, the bad, and the ugly. However, you are also in this process learning the PMO culture that currently exists. Remember, at this stage, in all likelihood, the employee or volunteer does not know the correct PMO culture, which is to say the correct responses to your queries and questions. All the employee or volunteer knows at this stage is to report to you what they do, as you observe the manner in which they go about their work, both of which will be based on the current culture they operate under. Very soon in this process, you will be able to mentally map the deviation between the PMO culture that exists and the culture you desire to exist as expressed through your statement of culture. It is precisely during this process where you will reveal to yourself the scope of the PMO personnel challenge ahead, because as you know, it is your current broken and dysfunctional culture that animates all employee and volunteer actions. You will note what you find during your interviews while building your org chart according to the three basic categories of the good, the bad, and the ugly. More on this labeling below. At this stage, you will personally interview every person filling a position box on the org chart that relates to PMO, paying particular care to note positions that you know should exist on the org chart, but are either totally missing or the work of an employee or volunteer is conflated and overlapping with the org chart box of the work performed by another different employee or volunteer. Further note, we return to the general theme. If you will not do this task as the PMO administrator, who can? Who will? In order to detect a missing box on the organizational chart, which is to say missing task on the org chart, the PMO administrator must know what he wants his org chart to look like in order to compare the org chart that actually exists to the org chart he desires to exist. Thus, at the end of this inquiry process, you will end up with two org charts. The predictably incomplete and insufficient org chart diagramming the reality of the dysfunctional organization you have inherited, and the second org chart of the innovative model of PMO you must install. Now what? The variance between the two org charts, plus what you learned in the discovery process about your existing culture, defines, illustrates, and roadmaps the work you must now complete through your as-yet-to-be-created plan to move PMO from where it is to where you want it to be. To repeat, the variance between the two org charts, plus what you learned in the discovery process about your existing culture, defines, illustrates, and roadmaps the work you must now complete through your as-yet-to-be-created plan to move PMO from where it is to where you want it to be. Many PMO problems exist not because of what the org chart indicates, but because of what the org chart should indicate, but does not. Missing org chart boxes translate directly to jobs that should be performed, but cannot be performed because the position required for the work to be done is non-existent. How can a non-existent job be filled, much less the associated work be completed? Example, parish business manager. There is none where you are? No such box exists on the org chart? Or there is an insufficient understanding of this job? As such, it's not what you sometimes see on the org chart. It's what you don't see that you should that is going to give you enormous grief. The missing parish business manager box should become conspicuous to you by its absence, but only if you have created an org chart of PMO you desire that includes such a box. This org chart creation task is critical because it is foundational, but at the same time not an easy task for a variety of reasons. Number one, your prior experience reviewing organizations and rebuilding org charts is helpful. Why? Because you know where the skeletons, the usual suspects, the common deficiencies and failures are hiding. You not only know what questions to ask employees and volunteers, you know the art and nuance of asking them. This wisdom comes from experience and practice. If you have no prior experience in relation to org chart analysis, it's tough to identify what should be there that is not. Do your best, but you are not alone. Know you can ask for help. Like anything else, the more you do it, the better at it you will become. Number two, the people you speak with in PMO will tell you all they know. The problem is, they usually don't know enough. You could easily end up with your org chart version 1.0, as a few floating boxes on a piece of paper, poorly defined, poorly labeled, and also not connected to each other in any way, or at least in any coherent way, not because the boxes shouldn't be connected, but because nobody really knows enough to robustly answer your questions. Is this your fault upon arrival? No. Are you stuck fixing it? Yes, because you are the PMO administrator. Number 3, after you have an org chart 1.0 picture of the current state of your PMO, you must be able to create a new org chart version 2.0 picture of what you need to exist to become superior in PMO. Do you yet know what your PMO org chart should look like based upon all the specific needs of the parish and geographic community you serve? Who told you? How do you find out? Are you sure your information sources are correct? And finally, number 4, rolling out a new org chart is like parachuting out of an airplane. You have 2 chances to get this right. Your main chance and your backup chance when you burn up your new guy goodwill after blowing your first chance. As such, you must fully and truly conceptually understand PMO, what it is and what it is not, what it should do and what is not within the role of PMO. Fundamentally, a correct org chart is merely a reflection of how any organization should be constructed, but there's a catch. The folks operating under the existing org chart are often very happy just the way things are. Thank you very much. If you are going to introduce the trauma of organizational change, and trauma is the correct word, you better get all things change right the first time, but for sure the second time. Otherwise, you have blown your credibility, and that's something very hard to earn back.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.